Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone. Welcome. This is AI Talk, and I'm your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today, we're discussing the topic of data quality in the age of generative AI. And data quality is crucial for Gen AI success. It ensures accurate results, builds trust, helps meet regulations, but ultimately, good data leads to better decision making and stronger performance. And by focusing on data quality, businesses can maximize the benefits of Gen AI while fostering ethical practices and driving innovation. So today we're going to cover three important topics. We're going to discuss data governance and ethical considerations when implementing Gen AI. Striking a right balance between innovation and ethical integrity is essential. So how do you ensure that AI is used responsibly, especially when dealing with sensitive data? Then we'll explore leveraging AI to automate data quality assurance. Automation can drastically improve efficiency, but how do you ensure your AI systems maintain the highest quality data standards without compromising accuracy? And finally, we'll examine the synergy between automated processes and human expertise. Machines are powerful, but they can't replace human intuition and oversight. So how do you combine the strengths of both to ensure optimal results? Ultimately, mastering data quality with Gen AI is essential to gain competitive advantage, enhance decision making, and drive innovation. And for professionals, staying ahead of the AI curve is key to future proofing your career. But how do you do it? Well, stay tuned for a great panel of guests. But before I introduce our guests, I do want to say thank you for everyone attending today. And that includes the folks that are joining us live on LinkedIn. Hello. And thank you everyone else for joining us also on Zoom today. Join us on Zoom for the full experience. It should be a great discussion today. So please join in with your questions and comments in the chat feature. That's where I'll be looking for questions and comments along the way. So please jump in. I will attempt to get some of your questions and comments into the flow of our discussion today, and we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. With that, let's jump on in and introduce our guests today, starting with Diana Kearns-Manolatos, Technology Transformation Research Leader at Deloitte. Diana, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from today?
Kevin, glad to be here, calling in from New York.
New York, welcome aboard. Thank you, Diana, for being with us. It's great to see you again. Also with us today is Pat McGrew, Managing Director at the McGrew Group. Pat, where are you calling in from today?
I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado.
Wonderful Denver, Colorado. Welcome aboard, Pat. Thank you so much for being with us. And also, Deanna Petrova, Digital Growth and Product Head at the August Collection. Deanna, welcome aboard. And where are you calling in from?
Hi, great to see you again, Kevin. I'm calling from London.
London today. All right. And I am here in Portland, Oregon. Indeed, we're covering so many time zones today. Fantastic to reach across the world today with our show. Now, folks, to get us started, I'd like to draw our attention to an article published recently by TechTarget called Generative AI Shines a Spotlight on Data Governance and Trust. The article emphasizes the importance of a robust data governance framework to support trustworthy generative AI applications. Key points include data quality and integrity. Indeed, 70% of organizations are now prioritizing data quality in AI. It talks also about data bias and security risks. Without careful governance, AI can perpetuate biases and mishandle sensitive data. And ultimately, comprehensive governance frameworks, which are crucial for Gen AI adoption as it grows across various industries. So my question to the group today is, what are your thoughts on the article? Did the article miss anything important that we should consider? So I'd like to start with you, Diana, if I could today. What are your thoughts on the article?
Thanks, Kevin. The article really resonated with me. Being in a research role at Deloitte, we've done our own research into this area and found very similarly that a lack of trust is a critical barrier to large scale Gen AI adoption and deployment. And so, really focusing on trust in the Gen AI inputs, the data that's going into training your model, as well as the Gen AI outputs, as well as worker trust in the technology, are all really critical to get from experiments and proof of concepts to that enterprise scale that most organizations are looking for. So
Hmm.
I think the article is spot on that trust is likely to become an even bigger issue for large scale deployments as time goes on.
Now, Diana, you folks at Deloitte have studied this. Trust, obviously, as you say, is so important, but it's also a matter of perception. What are your quick recommendations for organizations looking to demonstrate that they should be trustworthy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when looking at trust, many of the fundamentals are going to look similar to what you will have seen from prior digital transformations. But with Gen AI, there are a couple of things that are very specific. We're talking about data here today, and that is foundational, making sure that you have a data architecture that's considering your internal data, your external data, where it came from, that you're tagging it, and that you're understanding what's generated by Gen AI, what's generated from humans, and that you're really tracking it across the life cycle. That's very unique to this Gen AI conversation around trust. And then, of course, we have our trustworthy AI framework at Deloitte. So that is about anchoring on 7 dimensions of trust: transparent and explainable, fair and impartial, robust and reliable, respectful of privacy, safe and secure, and responsible and accountable. So really making sure that all 7 of those areas are
Hmm.
part of the way that you're thinking about trust in AI.
Thank you, Diana, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that in a bit more detail here later on in our discussion today. But moving on to Pat. Pat, what are your thoughts about the article, and how has data governance changed in light of Gen AI?
So I think that the article did a great job of laying some basic fundamentals down, but I hope people don't stop thinking that that article has given them everything that they need to know. Because what we know about AI governance is it's complex. And we know that when the folks who are actually charged with doing AI governance are surveyed, they throw up a lot of red flags because they feel that there's not a lot of training and certification available to them to make them better at their job. So you can read the list in the article of the things you should be taking care of, but if you don't have the background, if you've been suddenly flown into a role, somebody points at you today and says, "Hi, you're now in charge of AI governance. Aren't you lucky?"
Right.
And you're not really sure where to start. The article gives you some breadcrumbs, but you're going to need to go find that community of professionals to help you understand
Mm.
what kind of training you really need to do it well, what kind of governance policies you should be setting. And you're going to need to understand that as you learn, you have an obligation to pull your organization behind you so that they understand the fundamentals. Nobody's born knowing what AI governance is supposed to look like. So we're all going to have to work hard at it.
Well, indeed, Pat, you bring up an important point, and I've often asked this question: what are the skills that are important to have, and where do I find the training and education to get those? Do you have a recommendation?
One place that I look to for guidance is IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, because interestingly, as privacy professionals, they are very often at the forefront of trying to figure out what the obligations of an enterprise are when it comes to using AI within the 4 walls of the organization, especially if it's a data-driven organization. And today, I think that's every organization.
Mm.
But whether you're in healthcare or insurance or banking, or you're a retailer holding on to loyalty information from your customers, the privacy aspects have and compliance aspects have just grown and grown and grown. And luckily, IAPP has begun providing guidance and doing surveys of their membership to understand. They recently did one with Ernst & Young. They did a survey very recently where they talked to their professionals, and almost to a one, they found that the concern was how to get better training so that they could write better policies, and how to find the best way to enforce compliance with those policies,
Mm.
which you can have all the policies in the world. If you don't enforce them, you're at risk. And risk mitigation is a big concern in this space.
Now, Deanna, what are your thoughts on the article? Did the article miss anything important that we should be considering?
I don't think so. I completely agree with like Pat and Diana that it's a great overview and it's a great starting point to consider what it means to, create governance in any company. But I think to expand a little bit more on Pat's point as well, because I am very much aligned with everything she was saying about us learning as we go along. It's very challenging right now in every organization to just be the AI person, right? Like every organization, irrespective of how big or small, I think has the AI person somewhere there. And to that point, a lot of people are not necessarily trained. They don't know where to look for resources. The fact that you're a little bit more technical does not necessarily mean that you can just go and become that governance, person profile, whatever you want to call it for the organization. And I think that's especially true for like the small, medium kind of enterprise, right? Like when you're an enterprise global company, you probably have a little bit more resource and funding and so on. While within the small, medium enterprises, you also get a lot of, AI is such a buzzword. So, okay, somebody does something with AI, figure it out. And I think at the moment, the world is going through that transition, similarly to how we went through that transition when digital became a thing, all of a sudden migrating everything online. There wasn't necessarily a rule book or a guidebook. There were, as Pat said, breadcrumbs where people with a little bit more knowledge and so on started building the framework for where we all kind of live now, right? Like as to what's acceptable online, what's not. I mean, and all the regulation that came through that, like GDPR being one recent example, right? Of us all like kind of conforming to a certain level of data privacy, data obligation within the EU, and companies being a little bit more compliant than before, where you had no clue why your email or data is somewhere on the internet and what's happening there. So I think with AI, it's very similar, like the process that we're going through right now.
Now, Deanna, you mentioned small and medium-sized businesses, and I think it's important to keep them in the mix here. Not every organization is an enterprise with a large infrastructure or teams of experts. We're here talking about data quality in the age of generative AI. If I'm a small or medium-sized business and I'm hearing about data quality and AI, where should I look first in terms of my data and ensuring that it is of the right quality?
Gosh, the $1 million question, right? Like, I think the answer, as much as probably most people wouldn't want to hear it, is it depends. It depends how you've actually structured yourself to start with and where you are on the journey. I mean, there are some basic kind of setups that most companies have. So when you think about CRM and your data entering your CRM and how you keep customer profiles, to Pat's point again, loyalty programs and so on and so forth, that's all customer data. So it really depends what you do. Like, are you B2C, B2B, what type of an organization you are? But I think your CRM data is probably one of the first steps and kind of where you hold your consumer data primarily, because this is probably the biggest pool for you to learn from, train any models on, and create efficiencies. So I would probably start there. And again, I go from a slightly more marketing perspective, so this is probably the most important aspect for me. But yeah, happy to hear if anybody has other thoughts from a slightly different angle.
Deanna, I absolutely agree with you. And I go back to a conversation I had with a client who had 83 customer databases.
Oh,
And
wow.
each one
83.
of 83, and
Wow.
each one of them had some data about every single customer, and they didn't all agree because they were each departmentally owned. And so they were not updated in sync. They were not updated in sequence. And when they began trying to approach looking at their customer data using GPT type tools, they became aware that depending on which of the databases they pointed at, they got completely different results. And from a usability perspective, that opened their eyes to what they had done to themselves. For them, the solution was to stop the project of using a GPT tool to analyze their data until they could build some new middleware that resolved the differences between the 83. And it's not an unusual problem because of so many mergers and acquisitions, and because so many enterprises allowed departments to do whatever they wanted over the years. we now wind up in this situation where the assumption of a single source of truth about every one of your customers, you might want to check that first before you start trying to apply these really amazing tools to the data that's available to you.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, very
and
good.
I can layer in here as well with a slightly different
Please.
perspective too. I agree with everything that's been said. And building on that, I think it's also important to look at what are the AI capabilities that you're actually trying to enable. Because when we talk about generative AI is many different types of generative capabilities. We could be talking about text chatbots, or intelligent automation, which tends to be one of the more popular capabilities. But there's also applying generative AI to cybersecurity, prediction, and optimization. If we move away from text generation, there's voice agents. You can also be using generative AI for intelligent robotics or for digital twins and simulations. So I think a couple of things to be thinking about are, one, what type of AI capability are you actually trying to enable? And therefore, what type of data and data architecture is needed under those capabilities? Is it text? Is it voice? Is it internal proprietary data? Are you using RAG to bring in data from outside of your organization into multi-agent applications? And so I think all of that is very foundational, and therefore, to agree with Diana, it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the Gen AI. If it's a marketing use case, absolutely, that customer data is paramount. If you're a life sciences organization that's trying to use generative AI and industry-specific models to advance R&D, it's a very different set of data requirements that you would be bringing together for that type of data architecture. So that's my first point. I think my second point is, and it may sound straightforward, but step one is an organization also needs to invest in data management. If you don't have the money behind it, you can only go so far. It's not just, putting the AI hat and the data management hat on someone. It really is fundamentally investing in data management and risk management capabilities. And so one of the critical investment areas that we see through our research is that 3/4 of the almost 3,000 global business and technology organizations we've surveyed are increasing their investment around data lifecycle management in order to enable their Gen AI strategies. So those would be my 2 points, is actually, thinking about what is the AI capability and the data that's needed to support it, and then putting the money behind the data lifecycle management to enable that strategy.
All right. The article is from TechTarget. It is called Generative AI Shines a Spotlight on Data Governance and Trust. There is a link in the chat feature. Go ahead and take a look at it, folks. What do you think? Give us a comment. Tell us what you think about the article. Is it spot on? Did it miss anything? What are your thoughts about where that article is headed and what it means to us today? I do need to move us on to our discussion points today, but one comment from James here. James is saying, I think the problem lies in how you treat output from AI. If you think that it has a special view of the truth, quote, then this is the wrong approach. It would be like listening to one person saying that they know the truth, and it's just another input to a decision-making process. So, James, I think that's spot on observation. Thank you for that comment. But folks, I do need to move us on to our first discussion point today, and that's about the ethical considerations with data governance when using Gen AI in your organization. Pat, how do you ensure that AI is used responsibly, especially when dealing with sensitive data, and striking the right balance between innovation and ethical integrity?
The answer, boy, we have to stop saying it depends. Every type of business, right? Every industry segment has its own special considerations. So I work a lot in the print and customer communication space where it might be insurance data, it might be healthcare data, it might be banking data, retirement data. Those are, and then and customer loyalty data. And you want to make sure that you have that you have really excellent safeguards around the use of that data. Now, the thing is that most of the businesses that I work with and the segments I work in, that's been a requirement, a legal requirement for a very long time. Some organizations are better at it than others. But now, as we start to bring in the use of generative AI tools to analyze and do some predictive analysis, as well as some other forms of analysis of this data, there are a lot of risks. So imagine in healthcare, you want to be very careful about the use of personal health data. In a healthcare setting, it has some very practical considerations. Insurance companies would love to get a hold of your personal healthcare data to be able to make decisions about how to rate you and how to charge you for the insurance that they cover you with. But that is actually not a legal use of that data in the US today. As far as I'm aware, in most of the rest of the world, that wouldn't be illegal use. And yet, an actor in the organization, a well-meaning employee who is trying to do the best by the organization they work for, an actuary working, and who believes they're doing the right thing, but maybe hasn't had the ethical training that they should have had before they were turned loose with AI tools, could make some really bad decisions. So one of the conversations that we have quite a bit with the enterprise level clients that we work with is that requirement for ethical training in addition to governance training and policy training, and to actually lead with ethics training. And sometimes that means bringing in a qualified expert to bring that ethics component into the story. And we've actually found that that works better than trying to have one of your own team leads read something on the internet about ethics and try and build a 5 PowerPoint slide deck. Although we've seen that done too, the preference is to find the people in the industries you work in who are the compliance experts and the ethics experts, to help people come to an understanding, and then to constantly go back and retest their understanding of the decisions that they're making in the ethical context, as well as in the privacy and compliance context. It's not easy. And the larger the organization, the harder it is. But recently we were speaking we were doing an AI for printers session at a trade show, and we asked who was doing ethics training with their employees and who was governance and policy training with their employees. We actually had 5 people out of 100 raise their hand and say yes. And that actually impressed me, because I expected it to be 0.
Now, Deanna, ethical considerations with Gen AI, I mean, I get governance and I get innovation, but I'm not always clear on what the ethical considerations really are. Can you help us get grounded on what ethical considerations we are facing in just basic building block terms?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to consider. And again, we are at the building blocks of everything that the future is going to hold when it comes to AI, how we train the models and so on. I think if you remember recently, maybe a few months ago, there was this whole discussion about ethical considerations of the data, privacy and integrity when it came to Slack, because they were training their models on the conversations that people were having, and people didn't even know about that, right? And I think some other models have also done this, because if we just zoom out just on a human level, right, like aside from being a professional in that field, I have put data on the internet. We probably all have, like everything that we're doing is kind of piece of information. And ultimately, we've never provided consent that like these generative AI models are supposed to be trained on that, but they were to a certain extent. And I think this is now shifting, because obviously people are becoming more and more conscious about the data that they're providing and how is it being used. And I think what we're going to see with organizations, irrespective like how big or small they're going to be, is that they would need to have all these checkpoints in place and a lot more transparency about what is this data for, how is it going to be used. And to Pat's point, there needs to be that whole training about ethics And hopefully it's going to be done by, yes, the professionals that can come in and give you that train of thought about like ethical usage of data and so on and so forth. But ultimately, I think it's slowly going to become part of our day-to-day, kind of how, again, I don't want to go back to GDPR, but because it's like a similar step-by-step process, right? Where we all had to go through a big data training and change in terms of organization in the European Union, irrespective how big or small, everybody kind of had to become a champion. I think we're going to go through the same cycle with AI, and we're just in the beginning of it, because going back to the original point, we yet don't have a specific playbook. I think everybody is now establishing these use cases that are going to be used to say, okay, this is the blueprint for you, company A, B, and C, depending what you're doing, how you're processing the data, as to where the boundaries are and how it looks. And I think at the moment there is a lot of nervousness around the ethics and kind of what's happening with my data, right? Like, it's just a little bit, we don't know yet. Hopefully companies are doing the right thing, but I'm sure that at the moment there's probably a bit of a gray line in certain areas.
All right, now, Diana, what do we do about this? I've been wanting to get to you to talk about what key governance frameworks should organizations consider when implementing Gen AI to ensure data privacy and security.
Well, thanks for that. So I alluded earlier to Deloitte's trustworthy AI framework that has the 7 dimensions of trust. So, one is around transparency and explainability. So making sure that you are understanding what data is available. And I think that for Gen AI, this is particularly important when we think about the prompts, because very often the person who is doing the prompting doesn't understand the data that the model has been trained on. So it's really critical to have that transparency and explainability of what the data inputs are, how the model is making decisions, so that the prompt engineer, which is really actually any user who is touching the generative AI model, understands the contextual parameters that the model is operating under. And so I think that with Gen AI specifically, you hear a lot about hallucinations. And that training that the group has been talking about is what's really critically important, of having transparency into what I like to call kind of the known universe of the Gen AI model. Because that's when instances of hallucinations really start to pick up in the Gen AI outputs, is when Gen AI is making things up to fill in the gaps, because you're asking it a question that's not within the realm of its contextual understanding. So it's many of the same things that we would talk about for AI in general, but it just becomes especially important to educate people on how transparent and explainable data, fair and impartial processes, robust and reliable outputs, respect of privacy, safety and security, and that there's responsibility and accountability. All of those 7 dimensions that we would always talk about for AI, understanding how prompting, as well as using models that you may not have full transparency into what data they were trained on, or how the model is making decisions. If you're using publicly available models, that's kind of the unique flavor that we start to see with Gen AI, to make sure that when you're implementing trust building actions, that you can have training around where there is the risk of opacity, because you're bringing in models where you don't fully understand how they're making decisions. And so some of the actionable things that I've seen from clients in our research are things like setting up centers of excellence, building prompt libraries that have prompts that have been pre-configured and pre-tested on that model, so that you know that you're having reliable outputs, and really human in the loop as the standard. So, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more going forward, but just making sure that there's human oversight, and not having models that are making decisions autonomously, that you do have humans who have a good understanding of what good should look like for that given use case, reviewing the output of the model. So those are a few things.
All right. Very good. We are here today with Diana Kearns Manolatos from Deloitte, Pat McGrew from the McGrew Group, and Diana Petrova from the August Collection. We're here talking about data quality in the age of Gen AI. And listen, if you have a question or a comment for our panel, please pop them into the webinar chat feature. And indeed, we are giving away a AI Talk mug to the best comment or best question today. Here I have a mug from our sister show, Digital Transformation Talk. The AI Talk mug is much more functional and much more aesthetically pleasing. But you'll get the idea that if you are chosen today for your contribution, you'll get one of these really nifty mugs. So place to put your bourbon and coffee in the morning. What do you say? All right. Let's move along now. Oh, I do want to get to a couple of questions here. So, folks, this question here coming or comment coming from Priya, can the panel discuss bias in the context of ethical consideration and journalization of outputs in the context of biased data? Anyone have a comment for Priya on this?
I'm happy to jump in. I spent a part of my misspent middle-aged years attending a lot of ethics conferences, primarily because I was working with a lot of data that was what I'd call at-risk data. It had privacy connotations. It was used in insurance. It was used in healthcare, and I wanted to understand what the ethical responsibilities we all had really should be. The interesting thing that you walk away with is that to not have bias. And even something that looks like ones and zeros is constructed with some level of bias. So it could be as simple as a check mark in a column that slots a customer into a certain category or a certain tier. Even in loyalty points, whether you're a gold, silver, or platinum has an implied bias to it. So there's going to be bias. The responsibility of an organization using data is that human oversight, that accountability to make sure that the biases are not overtaking the value of the analysis of the data in question. And the challenge there is that a well-meaning analyst with a little bit of bias can interpret data in a way that puts an enterprise at risk. And it is difficult to get to that kernel of how you prevent that bias from impacting big enterprise decisions. So we know it's possible. We need to be on the watch for it. It should be part of all the ethical training that we provide to our employees, but it should also be part of the quarterly review conversations, and it should be part of the compliance training to make sure that the focus stays on when personal bias is influencing the analysis that the business is relying on. And it's a hard thing to do.
All right, very good. And this question coming in again from James. James, thank you so much. Do the panelists think that it is true that organizations have a natural tendency to mistrust the accuracy of their data? And what can we do about that? Anyone have a comment for James on that?
I can take this one because I genuinely think that the answer is yes, but there is a lot of also like the tunnel vision effect that if you've spent too long in an organization, you kind of forget about the data biases, the data silos and gaps, kind of to Pat's earlier example of the 83 different customer databases, and every team is kind of running with one of them, considering it to be the source of truth. So I genuinely think this is a continuous challenge for any business that we started talking about during the digital transformation times and the big data times and so on. And now it's just transferring into a new stream of work being AI, and everybody trying to, yes, put the models on top of the data to speed up, make it more accurate and so on, like get the benefits out of it, right? But actually the challenge hasn't changed over the last probably, I'll say 20 years, 30 years. It's always like if you had a database, if you're gathering like customer information, it's always been the same aspect about integrity and being able to trust your data. And the bigger you grow, the more sources you get, the more difficult it becomes to, ensure everything is okay. And I think there was a period in which there was this rapid digital transformation and scaling for every single organization. Traditional organizations that, let's say, even kept paper records, right? Like there were these companies in the 90s that had to go into the digital world. And this is where you saw like a lot of these discrepancies starting to appear, because everybody was like, quick fix, we need to be online, do this, do that. And now this problem has just scaled through time because we keep on adding one more system. And yeah, to Pat's original comment, like if you ask different team members, they'll probably tell you a very different story to what the data tells. And, although we always say data doesn't lie, I think we're in an age where data just tells the story you want it to tell. And you kind of need to manage that. So we are at an age where data needs to be a little bit mistrusted, just to make sure that your checks and balances are in place. And once those are there, I think, yes, you can forward and just make sure that you have regular quality checks to Pat's point that, yeah, you can never just leave it run on its own and be a self-sustaining system, at least for now, maybe in the future.
And Diana, would you say that Diana brought up hallucination, and I've had that experience where I've watched true hallucinations appear on my screen when I've written prompts and made inquiries. And do you feel like that when we're having these conversations with our team members about how they're using the different AI tools, that we have to remind them that the information that comes back is worthy of being vetted, that it shouldn't be taken as the single source of truth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think this is, again, a really huge point of governance and training, especially for, more junior team members that would come in and they're quite enthusiastic and they're very much in tune with, the new tools, AI and so on. And because it produces fast results, I think some of the steps where a potentially more experienced team member would be like, okay, but let me check if this is correct, having those cross checks to just make sure that the story is being crafted. And I have examples as well, like in the past, that we have made decisions that have been inaccurate based on data that's been presented because those checkpoints, for example, have not been followed. And, nowadays I'm just very, very adamant that always go back and just do your cross checks to ensure that that story is correct, because to both of your points, it can lead to an organization making a lot of wrong decisions based on like single person's input, right? That was not aware as to how the data is structured, built, or what's the story that it tells.
Yeah. I've seen the same thing. And I think it goes back to that user training. Is it's not just for the prompt engineers, your traditional engineer to understand, or your data architect to understand. If you are anyone who is touching the model through prompting, even an end user has to understand, one, there's a risk of hallucination in whatever that use case is. And what the AI is capable of doing and what's outside of its realm of capability, because I think especially with many users, there's not awareness that Gen AI can make things up if it doesn't know the answer. So that base level training is critically important.
I do that. I make stuff up when I don't know the answer.
So imagine if you write something, Kevin, and it goes out into the ether and it's maybe not 100% correct, and then models are being trained on what you have written. And that's where you start to see the hallucinations there, because somewhere the model got a hold of some data that it then interpreted in such a way to believe that it was providing an accurate recount of the prompt that you gave it. And we know there's a lot of bad information out on the internet. So internet trained models, I had a large language model engineer said to me that he would never recommend to an enterprise to allow their employees to use these tools outbound. If you are pointing it at an internal database where you have a reasonable chance of at least being able to correct data if you start to see discrepancies in how the model is returning analysis to you, that's one thing. But the minute you open the door to the internet and you begin using data that you did not develop and you cannot certify to inform your business decisions, you've created a huge risk.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I am conscious of our time running very short today, folks. I do want to ask about a topic that is important, I'm curious about, and that is using AI to govern AI. So I'm curious what tools are available, what AI-driven tools are available to use to streamline and manage the data quality assurance process, and what benefits do they have? Diana, can you give us a perspective on what tools may be available to help us with data quality assurance?
Yeah, absolutely. So without naming any names, we have some survey data from Deloitte's fourth global future of cyber study, where we asked over 1,000 leaders in the market how they're using AI to help them with cyber risk security and improving their cyber programs. So really the number one area was deploying AI-based tools to continually monitor the organization's digital infrastructure. And so in terms of data that, infrastructure as a service, looking at data that has to do with where there might be vulnerabilities or threats on the infrastructure, that it was the number one area that we saw. Some of the other areas were around generating advanced cybersecurity simulations. So if we think about this in terms of the data environment, AI and Gen AI is very powerful because it's a type of technology that allows for high variability in the outputs. And so we were talking about it in the negative before, because that variation in outputs is where you can see some of the things like hallucinations and some of the unpredictability of quality. But that simulation capability can be really powerful for looking at potential data risks or anomaly detection or data security threats. So those are a few of the areas that we would see. And then in terms of data quality, I mentioned it earlier, but just making sure that for any tool or application that you're using, that there is a human in the loop who's having oversight. I think all of our research shows that that's going to be the standard for at least the next 2 to 3 years, is having these automated tools, working with either a senior engineer or a data architect that's going to review those outputs.
All right, very good. We are here today with Diana Kearns-Manolatos, Pat McGrew, and Diana Petrova. We've been talking about data quality in the age of generative AI. Folks, where has our time gone? It's just slipped by so quickly. I want to move on to our action item round. I'm wondering if each of you could please provide us with one quick action item that our viewers can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today. Pat, do you have an action item for us?
I do, and it is going to be a 2-point action item. Part one is to look at your organization carefully and identify who you are working with on the outside of your organization to help you make governance decisions and ethics decisions. If you don't currently have a partner for that, this is the time to start vetting one and bringing them in, whether it's a Deloitte organization or it's an organization like IAPP. But you need that help. You're going to need that guidance. And point two is then make sure that you've got the budget to not make it a one-off, to make sure that this is going to be a continuing budget line item, because this problem, this challenge is not going to go away.
That is Pat McGrew, Managing Director at the McGrew Group. Pat, thank you so much for being with us today and for your action item. Deanna, do you have an action item for us?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I've always said that AI is here to help us be smarter, faster, and more scalable. It's, at scale in a sense. But I think the real beauty is going to lie into what we've been talking about today, that interaction between AI and the human touch. Like, it's not going to go away. And I think it's so fundamentally important for organizations to invest in a person, in training, in that ethical understanding, not even one, if possible, most of the organizations, but at least to start with the first step, to have one person who understands it on that level.
That is Deanna Petrova, Digital Growth and Product Head at the August Collection. Deanna, thank you so much for being with us again on the show today. And finally, Diana, do you have an action item for us, Diana?
Yeah, of course. So I think we're at this critical juncture with Gen AI investments where we need to prove the value while managing the risk, all while keeping humans in the center of the decision making. So I think, the most important thing to be doing is on the cost benefit side, really building that case of what's the value you're trying to achieve and how can you manage that risk effectively in order to achieve the value. And a critical part of that will be establishing clear boundaries between human responsibility and accountability and what the AI is responsible for, so you can effectively track the value while managing the risk.
That is Diana Kearns-Manolatos, Technology Transformation Research Leader at Deloitte. Thank you, Diana, for being with us. And thank you, everyone here. Diana, Pat, Deanna, it has been great speaking with you today. What a great panel. Your perspectives and advice were spot on, so thank you so much. I hope that we'll get a chance to talk again soon. And we do have a winner of the fantastic AI Talk mug. That is James. James, thank you for your comments and questions today. We will be reaching out to you and arranging for you to receive your fantastic new AI Talk mug. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Join us again next time on November 12th with another great panel of guests discussing the topic of leading the rollout of AI tools across your organization. That should be another great discussion. In the meantime, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. You can check me out. I'm Kevin Crane. And you can check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of AI Talk. And until next time, I am Kevin Crane. Thanks for watching.